the call to member for Goldstein.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, this motion is of paramount importance, and I congratulate the member for Barara for bringing it to the Parliament's attention, because there is a simple reality that 2 years since the October 7th attacks, we have seen an unprecedented rise in anti-Semitism in this country. And it is an absolute tragedy that, of course, stains the history of our nation. But the reality is lived by the experiences of Jewish Australians across our country, of course, many of which live within the federal electorate of Goldstein, the neighbouring electorate of the federal electorate of McNamara, and, of course, throughout our great country. And they have seen first-hand and lived first-hand the consequences of a failure of leadership that we have had, that has started in this federal parliament and the Prime Minister's chair, and so often through our state governments as well. And we've heard these stories directly from members of the Jewish community recently in the launch of the book Ruptured, which was recently launched at Glen Ira Town Hall, and I was privileged to be at that launch and given a copy of the book again by the Australian Union of Jewish Students in their recent leadership retreat in Canberra. In doing so, it goes through the stories and trauma of many of the local women in Goldstein and throughout Australia, talking about their experiences since October 7 and how that trauma is not over. Because the tragic reality of anti-Semitism that started immediately after October 7 has not stopped. From the steps of Sydney Opera House, where we had this absurd debate about whether people who were supporting Hamas were saying whether it was to gas the Jews or where are the Jews, and the solution from this parliament, this government, this Prime Minister wasn't simply to condemn anti-Semitism, which is an absolute disgrace and a stain on our nation, has led to a prolific outburst and outbreak of anti-Semitism that Australians are still living with today. It then escalated and continued, where we saw violent protests out the front of Central Shul in the Goldstein electorate in Caulfield South. We've seen graffitiing, firebombing, and of course the most explicit example of that was at the Adass Synagogue, but we have seen it in East Melbourne, as well as of course at Miznon in the city of Melbourne, where there have been attacks on restaurants, of course in the federal electorate of Wentworth as well. And at every point the Jewish community has been screaming out about the rise of anti-Semitism, and their expectations have been that they want their government on their side. There's not an unreasonable expectation of any Australian. Yes, they want moral support and they want people to stand by them. Where there is an issue with the law, yes, of course, there is a reasonable expectation to make sure that there was a change in law. But more than anything else, they wanted the government to call out and show leadership, to know that the standard the Australian government and our Prime Minister and the rest of the government of the Commonwealth of Australia was prepared to walk past was a standard that we were prepared to accept. And we know the standard they were prepared to accept, and it's the reality that people are living with today. And the consequence is now clear. As the member for Barara and the Shadow Attorney-General and my dear friend has outlined, it has led to a situation that 2 years after the coalition called for the IRGC to be listed as a terrorist organisation, finally, on the advice of ASIO, the government has been dragged, kicking and screaming, to listing them as a terrorist organisation. But it's important to understand that while this is an important step, 2 years too late, don't think it ends here, because so many people are still living with the consequences of anti-Semitism and will. I was speaking about this only recently, the other day, at St Kilda Shul, and in particular that where we often see the outbreak of extremism that validates or gives permissive environment for anti-Semitism, you see other types of degradation of other sections of the community. The expression so often used by the Jewish community is they're the canary in the coal mine. And we've seen extremism tolerated against the Jewish community. We've increasingly seen, particularly in Melbourne, a rise in homophobia as well, and unfortunately we've seen some of these things come into the Goldstein office of both the twins of anti-Semitism and homophobia, but we are seeing it now attacks on other sections of the community too. This is the lived reality of what happens when we tolerate extremism. We see a failure of leadership. It spreads. This is why good people need to stand up. And we've continued to see it from what happened in Juniper Salon in Bentley, sadly in the electorate of Goldstein, where we saw people simply seeking to get a haircut experience anti-Semitism. We have a choice. We can be a country of harmony, respect, dignity and stability, or we will continue to pay a price as a nation.